Hotep, welcome, and thank you for being a part of our audience today. We are going to have a great conversation with regards to Native Americans and just honoring them this month and today especially. My name is Kent Butler, and this is Matters of Diversity with Dr. B. And my first guest I'm going to introduce, and we'll introduce everyone else who's going to be on the panel today, is Gary Rhodes, and he's a doctor here at the University of Central Florida. He has written over 20 books in cinema and all those things that deal with Hollywood, and his titles of his books are The Peril of Movie Going in America and The Birth of American Horror Film. And so as a Native American, he's coming today to just kind of talk about his experiences. And so with that, without further ado, please welcome Gary Rhodes. Gary, come on in.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. It's wonderful to be with you today. We very much appreciate the invitation, and it's great to have the chance to talk today.
It's definitely great to have a chance to talk. It's good to see you. And why don't you do us the honors of inviting in our guests?
Okay, well, I'll turn it over to a long-term friend and colleague and fellow Oklahoman of mine, Jason Asnap.
There we go.
Hey, Jason.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Jason Asnap. I'm a Comanche and Muskogee Creek writer-director from Oklahoma originally, and now I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Nice.
I'd like to introduce, I guess, my friend Jonathan Sims. We've collaborated on a number of projects here in Albuquerque. He's Acoma Pueblo friend of mine, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Excellent.
Jason. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Sims. I'm from the Pueblo of Acoma, which is one of the 19 Pueblos here in New Mexico. And just thankful to be here. I'm a 15-year media making veteran here in New Mexico. I work mostly within tribal communities. And I've also been, if you want, I heard, Mr. Butler, I heard you talking about sovereignty and things like that. I've also been, oddly enough, a tribal official in my community. So I held the office of secretary for 2 years, which is kind of like the chief of staff position in our Pueblo. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I can I'll speak to whatever I can.
Excellent. So this is going to be a very light conversation today. I just really want to honor Native American Heritage Month and the fact that we stand on ground here in the United States that when you think about history, we have to give homage to the Native Americans who stood on this ground, who owned this land prior to the infiltration of it, I think, by others from other areas of the world. And so with that being said, how are you all doing today? How are you in your own physical space? How are you doing? And just want to check in that regards.
Well, thanks very much, Kent, for the kind words and for the question. I think we're all, dealing with the pandemic. What has heartened me a great deal is that despite the fact, frankly, some of the state government in my home state of Oklahoma, as well as many of the local governments have, in my view, not been that proactive in helping the communities in terms of COVID protections and precautions like masks. Conversely, I will say I've been extremely happy, proud, and heartened that my tribe, the Cherokee Nation, as well as others, I grew up in the Chickasaw Nation, have been extremely proactive in helping members of the nations in terms of COVID testing, assistance of various kinds, taking the kinds of protections that I'm afraid in some instances that the governments there have not done. So we're getting by with the pandemic slowly but surely, all of us, and I've been very heartened at how Native Americans in Oklahoma have handled the issue.
Nice, nice, nice. How about you, Jason?
Well, we're entering into the first week of a 2-week lockdown here in New Mexico. So that's been interesting. And I think the governor's done a pretty good job. Michelle Lujan Grisham, I think she's done a pretty good job on trying to clamp down on things here without really much federal guidance.
Right.
From my experience, I lived here in downtown, so I still feel part of a community. There are things open, takeout places. I can still walk to my favorite coffee shop, which I could actually see right down the outside my window. But it's hard. It's tough for everyone, and I'm just getting by just like everybody else.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And Jonathan?
Well, this week has found myself and my community in some dire straits, and I've actually been super busy this week trying to maintain the media fallout of this. And so what's happened is in our small community, we're talking about a Pueblo community. So we have about 3,000 tribal members on the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
We have about another 3,000 off the reservation. But what's happened is we've gone all year with numbers in the single digits, and we went about 2 months without having any cases, and within literally the last 3 weeks we've blown up to the fact where we have 175 cases in our Pueblo right now, which is huge. On top of that, the federal government has, I don't know if you're aware, but they have what's called the Indian Health Service, and the Indian Health Service is called IHS, and that's who provides healthcare to a lot of reservations, and it's healthcare that's provided by the federal government, and so what's happened is within the last 2 weeks, we got notice from the federal government that they're going to close our hospital, and it's like, how are you going to close a hospital during the middle of a pandemic? And so that's our big issue right now in our Pueblo is we don't have any say, in that. And so the only thing we could do is put public pressure on. And so this week for us and our community has been a week of press releases and things like that, trying to hit the media to get our story out there, to put some pressure on the federal government to keep our hospital open. We service 6,000 or so people in our area, and just lack of funding and lack of oversight, it's gotten to the point where they decided to close it on us with all of like 3 weeks notice. And so that's the situation we're in. As a whole, we're here in New Mexico about ready to go, like Jason said, into a 2-week clampdown. But our communities, some of our Pueblo communities, we've been locked down since March. My community itself, we have not let elders or children off of the reservation since March, if you can believe that. And we'll continue to do that until it goes away. So yeah, unfortunately, that's where we're at this week.
So when you think about that and the kind of information that's going to the people in your society, is the information coming forthright? I mean, who's providing that information? Is it coming directly from the government, or are there leaders within your organization that are there that are kind of supporting the members of your constituency?
Well, what's interesting is the initial information about the closing of a hospital should have come from the federal government to our community far earlier. And that was the issue. That's our big issue with them, is that if they've been planning this for 6 months, they dropped it on us with 3 weeks notice.
Right. So what kind of impact would it have, do you think, when it comes into action?
Oh, huge. The closest other medical facility for us is 30 miles away. The next closest and that's not even a trauma 1 level center. That's basically just a small town hospital.
Right.
So an hour away is Albuquerque, and that's where everybody's getting sent for COVID stuff. But yeah, we have 90,000 visits a year, and that we're right now what they want. They're shutting down, but they're putting it in phases. So right now, it's not completely shut down, but it's only operating as a clinic, meaning we have an entire hospital there, but they can't even fix a broken arm right now. They can give out medicine for colds and flu shots, and that's about it. And so, yeah, it's a huge detriment to our community.
So the people who made that decision, they just arbitrarily made that decision without necessarily having any real contact or communication with the folks inside. So
Yeah.
That got to be pretty frustrating. What's that like?
Well, it's you brought up that term early on, the idea of sovereignty, right?
Right.
And for us, sovereignty is having that ability to govern ourselves. And when you talk about the federal government and tribes in sovereignty, that you're talking about what then should become a government to government understanding. So it's like treating us like if you would China or or England or anything like that. We're supposed to have that sort of government to government relationship. And unfortunately, sometimes we just totally get bulldozed over, and it really becomes a matter of I think sometimes the federal government thinking that some of these tribes don't have the resources to fight, and so it's like, hey, yeah. So they wouldn't do this to the Navajo Nation per se, because the Navajo Nation has a ton of money involved. They got lobbyists, they got this and that. But we're a small little group out here, like I said, about 4,000. There's even smaller pueblos than us that are in the hundreds of people. And so, they thought that they could kind of do this, and we wouldn't complain. And and here we are. We're trying to organize everybody in our community to fight this.
Nice. Gary, how do you see the fight? What are you doing personally, maybe, or how can we, as United States citizens, help in this fight?
Well, I think I'm reminded of when I spoke at Howard University a couple of years ago, and somebody came up and spoke to me afterwards and very rightly and importantly said, the phrase that Native Americans are the invisible people in the United States. And I think, as you're doing today, bringing more attention, as I'm trying to do in some of even my recent op-eds in newspapers, even though I normally write, as we often do as scholars, for scholarly journals, trying to reach the broader public and do, in other words, what you're doing today, to where we can get greater visibility rather than being invisible, so to speak. I was perhaps, not to get overly political and so early, but I was very heartened also to hear in his first formal speech as president-elect, Joe Biden did mention Native Americans as among those groups. And I see John nodding, because that obviously was a great and wonderful moment to hear the kind of recognition, and the recognition that was there, obviously in terms of the vote count in Arizona, but nationally as well, because these fights continue. We may, as you wanted, we may get into the issue of casinos and monies, but certainly the current Oklahoma governor has tried to do what, and he's backed off. He certainly has tried to do what has so often happened to Native American nations, tribes in the past, and that is essentially rewrite an agreement, a treaty, if you will, about sovereignty and casinos and how much money has to be paid from those proceeds to the state of Oklahoma. So this is, these are ongoing battles, as so many things are in life. They're ongoing battles.
Right. So Jason, when you're not going down the hall, down the street to your favorite coffee shop, what are some of the ways that you're advocating and hoping for change for your community?
Well, I was actually just thinking about that coffee shop again. Just recently, I had run into Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who's one of two Native Congresswomen, Congress people that we have. And I think representation is important. And I think it's really, I think it's pretty amazing that, that we have that, and we're getting more and more, more and more political. We're entering into that arena. There's a lot of activism that's going on here in Albuquerque. In particular, there was the BLM movement, and those protests downtown were really powerful, and then that led into a protest that happened actually here in our what's called Old Town. And I'm thinking of there's a Oñate. We have the Oñate sculpture downtown. He was considered he's a conquistador, and he was not a friend of the Pueblo. And John can definitely speak more to that than I can. He can definitely speak more to that than I can. But just to finish up on that train of thought, I rode my bike down there just because I have a friend who's a journalist, and I dabble in journalism. I'm more of a film critic, but I rode my bike down there just to participate in that protest. But I got blocked off because just before I got there, that's when the shots rang out, and a man was shot at that protest. And so I see a lot. There's a lot of activity right now in the country. I think because of the current president, and so it feels very much what I've read of the '60s. There's definitely like opportunities to get your voice out there and be heard.
So you bring up a good point in terms of why we need to be heard in the first place. There are a lot of controls and mechanisms that are put into place to kind of control the Native American experience here in the United States. What's that like for you to kind of be under that kind of I don't know if it's oppressive or if it, or however you kind of feel under that kind of restraint. But what is it like when you see your government not necessarily standing up for your causes and making sure that the impacts of the decisions that are being made are also beneficial for your community?
Well, it's been going on for a long time. And so I'm kind of just, what I try to do, there's so much to tackle, and you have to kind of like pick your battles. And for me, I write Indigenous film criticism for High Country News. I contribute to other New Mexico magazine, First American Art. I'm a filmmaker as well. So I feel like that what I do is I try to tell that story, and I try to bring about representation in those ways because you can only do so much, but the things that you do, you bring your own gifts to what you do, and then hopefully you do it as well as you can.
Right.
I think of In Scott Momaday, like the documentary over him recently, Words from a Bear. He was very non-political, which I was very kind of fascinated by, because he felt that the work was most important to him, and you see that in his work. Like there's very little. In Scott Momaday is a Kiowa writer. He's the only Pulitzer Prize winning Native American writer. Just to familiarize everybody, if no one knows that. But it's interesting. It's like you have to basically pick what battles you're going to take on, and try to do the best that you can, and bring that energy, into those battles.
Yeah, I can understand that. So Gary, I can imagine that it's pretty cathartic, the writing that you do, especially with the op-eds and things along those lines. Can you talk about that, and what comes up for you when you get to write these pieces and see them published?
Well, yeah, thanks for that, Kent. I guess for me, growing up as Jason did in Oklahoma, which certainly California has the largest Native American population in terms of numbers of people, but Oklahoma has the largest different number of tribes of Native American nations in it. And, when I was growing up, it was not always a popular thing to be American Indian. We said at the time, certainly, Indian and so forth. And moving abroad, because I lived in Ireland for 12, 13 years, about 13 years, I was teaching at the Queen's University. Mm-hmm. And something different seemed to happen during those years where even after I came back, there was not just a greater initiatives in terms of heralding the Native American experiences. Even people, not again to get overly political, but even people like Elizabeth Warren claiming a heritage that may have not been documented, let's say, that it seemed like the pendulum had swung at least somewhat. And so I initially, when I was young, when I saw a clip of Sasheen Littlefeather, who had gone to the Academy Awards to not actually to accept the award for Marlon Brando when Brando won for The Godfather, but rather to kind of give out a cry, a plea for greater depictions, more authentic depictions of Native Americans, right? This was a famous moment in the history of the Oscars. And if you go back to that clip, you know, there were as many boos, alas, in the audience as there were applause. And so when I'm talking about the passage of time and the pendulum swinging, I think now there are publications like the New York Daily News or the LA Review of Books, where some of the places I'm publishing, they wouldn't have been interested 10 years ago in publishing the kinds of op-eds I'm writing. Even as recently as, say, The Lone Ranger, the Gore Verbinski film. You know, it tries on the one hand to make Tonto the more intelligent character over the Lone Ranger's character, but at the same time, he's played by, you know, Johnny Depp. So I think, you know, there's a lot of movement now, and I agree with Jason. I think there's certainly a lot of excitement, enthusiasm coming from the Black Lives Matter movement that is inspiring a lot of us. I think it's coming from other experiences. I was very heartened. I lived in the north of Ireland, you know, which it has itself a history like Native America of internal colonialization,
Right.
in this case by the British, and the way in which many of the nationalists in Northern Ireland herald the likes of Geronimo and have looked to both the Native American experience as well as African American leaders like Martin Luther King and their causes for greater civil rights, especially from the 1960s to the present. I mean, a lot of these are the things that are exciting me, but to bring it full circle to really where you asked your question, I think the great thing is now there are publications. When I spoke with the editor at the New York Daily News, they were extremely excited to hear from me.
Mm-hmm.
No one would have wanted that kind of dialogue. I say no one, perhaps that's overly harsh, but most publications, mainstream publications, they wouldn't have cared 10 or more years ago.
Right. And so that's really, you brought another good point in that we need to be, there needs to be solidarity with regards to how we all communicate and work together to kind of move forward this narrative, right, for equality and equity and inclusion and things along those lines. You know, I was thinking about what Jason said and what you were sharing just now too, about people who claim the heritage, right? Now, I have Native American blood in my system. I'm not as versed in it as I would like to have been because of my history, right? And so while I know that that is the case, I don't have enough of a sense of through history or through, I guess it would be documentation about what that means, right? And when I talk about my great-great-great-grandmother who was Native American, how do I bring that into my existence without it looking like I'm trying to co-opt someone else's experience, right? Because that's not what I'm trying to do, but at the same time, I want to have acknowledgement of that. And so what's your thoughts on people like Elizabeth Warren, myself, others who are out there who identify as Native American, but don't necessarily have the, I don't know what would be the best word for that, but don't have the, I guess the, I don't even know what the word
documentation or the that type of, yeah, well, I don't want to monopolize the conversation because I know Jason and John will want to speak to this. For me, I immediately think, as you're talking about, what I recently heard Michael Eric Dyson say when it came to African-American arts like hip hop, that, you know, we welcome people who have a sincere and respectful interest in it, as opposed to those people who don't, meaning the difference between, say, an Eminem and a Vanilla Ice, right? And that rang a chord with me because it's such a wonderful thing when people are interested, because It used to be that fewer people were. Some of us were even made to feel somewhat ashamed of our heritage as school kids, even in Oklahoma, frankly.
Right.
So it's a wonderful thing when people have the interest. I guess what I would fear only would be those cases where people are trying to use it for some particular advantage. And I think that's where some Cherokees had concerns about Elizabeth Warren, even if in some cases they would have otherwise been aligned with her or overall politics, but just that it seemed like it maybe was had been used for some advantage rather than as part of personal growth and
Right.
development and development for the greater
There's an
community.
ulterior motive to it, as opposed to there being some type of real gratification of understanding that that's who you are and part of your heritage.
That's extremely well said, I believe. But I know John and Jason probably would like to speak to that as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in there. Yeah, it's a very fine line and a touchy subject to walk when we talk about this. And because it evokes a lot of things. It evokes emotions, and it evokes a lot of like soul searching on both sides. It's hard as a person that knows you have tribal blood running through you, but you have no ties to any community or anything like that. And it's hard for you to like make that connection. And as much as you feel sometimes that you want to, you just have nowhere to start. And I understand that. I see that happen a lot. And then on the other side of the coin is the soul searching that has to come from tribal communities themselves, and how do we welcome these people back into the mix. What I think a lot of people don't understand sometimes, coming from the outside in, is that I think a lot of people like realize. So the influx of this has always been an issue, but it's become exacerbated with groups with companies like Ancestry.com
Yeah.
and things like that. What's funny is in my time in office, I can't even begin to tell you how many times we have people call in and say, "Hey, I just found out I'm Acoma," and then the next question out of their mouth is, "Where do I sign up for some money?" and what's so funny was half of the time I was like, "Well, if you find out, let me know, because I don't know where that money is either." And
No, because that's what it is, right? There's so many people who think about the fact that that Native Americans have rights to casinos, and they have all this what would be considered maybe reparations that come from the government that support that, and it's a misnomer, right? Because people really think that we're grabbing at it, and there's all these rich Native Americans out there, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not as enticing or as beneficial as people think, right?
Yeah, no, what's funny is, oftentimes that was our answer, was like, if you find out, please let us know, because I'm broke and I need some money too. but it is interesting, because that does happen, and it does happen. And I think that's in some cases where people that are coming at you with a good heart may not realize that on the other side of the wall, we've been dealing with that, right? And so of course we're going to kind of like vet a little hard. We're going to be like, "Hey, well, how do you know this?" Or who do you think in your family is this?
Right.
And so we're trying, and a lot of people get upset with that, but in many cases it's just us trying to find that tie, and I feel like it's got to be understanding on both sides, because to be honest, on the flip side of the coin, I know that us on the other side can be a little bit jaded, because we're trying to protect ourselves in many ways.
Exactly. And I can imagine when somebody's coming at you and they got the handout, right? And like, wait a minute, you can't be here for 1 minute with your handout, when we've been here for decades, right? We've been here for quite some time, and you come in here thinking that you're going to get this quick payoff.
Yep. And so it's interesting, because it happens far more than you would imagine.
So for a part of the history lesson here, what does it mean? I mean, what does the term federally recognized mean, and how does that fit in for folks who just don't necessarily understand, the nuances of what it is to be a Native American here in America?
I don't know who you got. Should I try to tackle that one? And
John,
Dr.
go ahead, John.
All right, so we'll try to tackle that, and then Dr. Rhodes or Jason, if you want to jump in. So federally recognized, the right is like a designation from the federal government in terms of um, which tribal groups receive federal funding. That's basically it. There's right now what they say, over 500 recognized tribes in America. On the non-recognized side, there's probably about another 120 or so that aren't recognized. Um, and what's crazy, man, is that recognition. There's no real like task to. There's no real vetting agent that allows a group to be recognized or not recognized. They say that it's a mixture of how many people you have, blood quantum, which is a whole nother issue we can talk about, right? Blood quantum, and then so blood quantum population, and what they call um, cultural activity, or like how much of their culture do they still have intact.
Right.
And what's crazy is those are the vetting agents, but then you have groups like, for instance, I learned a couple years ago about a friend of mine who's from a community called Klamath up in Oregon. And Klamath is a really interesting community because at one time it was probably the richest Native American tribe in America. This is like in the 20s. And so they were balling, like seriously. And what happened was the federal government recognized that these guys were making a ton of money off of lumber, and straight up this made them not a tribe anymore.
I know exactly where you were going.
And yeah, and
Black Wall Street and what happened in all those different places when you see somebody progressing and then you tear it down.
yeah, and so they basically just made them not a tribe. The most recent examples, I forget the tribe's name. You guys could jump in if you know. The tribe in I think it was like in Massachusetts or somewhere around there. I forget what their name was, but they had been trying to seek recognition for a long time. And part of that was, of course, that they were going to open a tribal casino. And so the feds, along with people that had interest, Atlantic City and a bunch of those other places, fought against that. So as much as there is this vetting agent, there's also a bunch of other things that come into play that serve no purpose in letting a community know whether they're so and who is to make that decision anyway. Who's to say that you're sufficient enough of this to be this.
Right.
And that's always been my issue.
Wow.
Blood quantum plays a large part of that. And one of the things that, for all you people that are watching this now, if you don't know, there's only like 3 things in the world that get blood quantum taken into account for. That's like us, what is it, like horses, and like the Kennel Association with how much how much a dog is worth something,
Right.
and that's effing crazy,
It is. Right.
And
It's such a lack of respect for persons.
it is.
Like,
but I'll let Mr. Rhodes and Jason jump in on that, because
what are your thoughts?
Go ahead, Jason. And John, it's Gary. Please call me Gary, everyone. But Jason, go ahead.
Well, on the idea of like who is native and who is not, or I think that's what we were talking about, an identity. I've always been of the opinion. To me, it's very simple. It's like you either are or you're not. Because on Twitter, yeah, to me, it's like very simple. And there's, like John said, there's over 550 some odd federal recognized tribes, and we're all different nations.
Right.
So the community that you belong to is going to be a different community than all the other 500 some odd nations, that they have different rules, they have different blood quantum approaches. My own tribe, we do have blood quantum. We have that blood quantum rule, and I forget what it is now. It goes lower each decade, it seems. But if we were to go back to further back in our history, we actually I am actually a product of captivity, which means that somewhere along the line, probably 6 generations back, my ancestor was captured by the tribe and brought into the tribe, because that's what we did, because we were fighting all the time. A lot of people were dying. We needed to capture people. So we didn't ask for a certificate degree of Indian blood back then to make sure that you were like, are you official? You were just brought in. That's how it was. Now things are different. But then you're speaking to things like money, basically money, and access to what's considered privileges. So I mean, it's a many layered thing. But culturally, I've always been of that. You're either whatever tribe you claim to belong to, or you're not. And there's none of this like, I'm part this or I'm part that. Anytime anyone says I'm part this, I'm automatically, my spider sense tingles. I'm like, you're part this. That means that you research this. That means it's like a hobby to you. I've never had that option. It's like, I was born into this.
I was born into
I never had a choice.
Nice.
I'm Comanche on my father's side and Muskogee Creek on my mother's side. I've always been that way. And
right, not a part.
There are times I didn't want to be that, because it was very difficult. I looked different. Culturally, I was different. I didn't have much money, whatever. But, culturally, I was always, rich. And it took a while to figure that out, when you're young.
Right.
Going to a school that's all white and actually no African Americans, and a few of us Indians. So in Oklahoma, small town Oklahoma, Cotton County, Welch's, Oklahoma.
So when you see betrayal, like you talk about that, right? Because that's really a really important thing to kind of hone in on. Because Gary, you talked a little bit about the fact that Johnny Depp was playing Tonto, and when you see that portrayal of who the Native American is, and it kind of, again, it goes back to that part thing, right? And so it's got to be somewhat a little bit of an insult, I would think, when Hollywood does portray someone as Native American without what you're saying, Jason, because that really resonated with me when you said, this is me. This is not me playing this role. This is who I am. And then when you see that portrayal on the other end, it just it just says such a deep message.
Well, and if I could say there, just following from Jason, to me, I think one of the many problems about Hollywood's portrayals, and indeed American cinema's portrayals, because the first film to feature an American Indian character was made in 1895. Mm-hmm. And it was called Scalping Scene, and it was simply that, a depiction of that, a simulation of that. What is unfortunate, among the many unfortunate things about Hollywood's depictions, I think, has been Hollywood's ability to take all of these hundreds of tribes of nations with amazingly different backgrounds, and we're brothers and sisters, and we share certain sensibilities, I think, but at the same time, people like mine that were centered around North Carolina before the Trail of Tears would be so dramatically different, and wonderfully so, from, say, the friends of mine that are in the Yurok or Hoopa Valley, the Hoopa in Northern California. So what Hollywood has often done is it's just made the American Indian as one, rather than of many, right? There's not been the diversity there. And of course, that one stemming from prior literature, 18th, 19th century literature, and Wild West shows and so forth, dime novels, it is not just the one Indian in the quote cowboy and Indian movies, but it's the pagan, the savage, the savage. Yeah, savage. And that continues, I mean, even in Oklahoma, unfortunately, there is one small town, Jason will probably know it because it's right on the Interstate 35, called Wynnewood, Oklahoma, between Dallas and Oklahoma City, and their team mascot are still the Wynnewood Savages, with a caricature of a Native American, for the mascot. So, so it's like all of a sudden, all of this vast experiences and diversities and histories, plural, become one, and they become one in a way that's also itself very negative because of all of the savagery and yada yada yada.
Right. And so, it's really funny because you brought that up. And so there's been all this name change controversy, like around the Washington. I don't know what they call themselves any longer, but with that emblem and the things along those lines, has that resonated with any of you in terms of how people see you? I mean, Gary, you pretty much clearly stated what that's like. It's got to be maddening in some regards to be kind of put into that perspective or that light. But what is it like for you to hear people, the majority, so to speak, say, no, this is right. We should keep this. This is the way it's supposed to be. I can care less about how Native Americans feel about this imagery.
Well, I will say, and I want John and Jason to jump in, but I will say quickly, because it's something I'm writing at the moment, and I've been even in touch with people at different companies. The corporate appropriation that you're talking about, that we associate certainly with sports teams, obviously the former, Washington Redskins, the Atlanta Braves, for example, wants to say, well, this is our heritage. And I was recently in touch with a spokesperson for Jeep Cherokee, because there's all kinds of products that have assimilated, or I would say stolen, tribal names as well as those of important Native Americans. And, Jeep Cherokee, the spokesperson said to me, well, this is all about the wonderful aspect of travel. And of course, I had to say, Cherokee travel at the behest of whites is indeed what forced removal, the Trail of Tears, was. And so now, admittedly, that was just maybe a dumb comment from one spokesperson, but there's all kinds of these, I think, corporate products, like the Jeep Cherokee. There's a Cherokee clothing brand.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, that's sold in 50 countries, including, I believe Target has ceased selling them, but they were for sale in America, so.
You just made me think about something just now, because I drive a Grand Cherokee, and now you've made me even think about that. And so,
well, and I'm not, I don't wish
no,
to
you're not. But I mean, it never resonated with me until you just said that just now. And
nice
now I have to think about that.
Please go, and I think Jason and John should jump in here, because I think this is another important part of it. Whether it's the Washington Redskins or Land O'Lakes Butter that got rid of its butter maiden recently. But there are so many of these others that have not, and so it continues. So please, guys, jump in.
Yeah, please.
I wish I had a Grand Cherokee. I have an old Jetta.
But I'm thinking about whether or not I didn't have this Grand Cherokee any longer.
That's hilarious.
I think it's funny. It's like when people mention their attachment to these mascots, and they're like, "Oh, it's a tradition. It goes back, someone." And it's like 50 years.
Right.
Well, you're talking about a culture, many cultures that are, in time immemorial, or like you're talking about cultures that are here before you were even, your ancestors were here. It's just it boggles my mind. It's like, that's not a tradition. That's like.
Yeah. So, okay, so let me, I'll bring something up that's really interesting. I actually, have a conversation, or will enter into a conversation about my heritage, right? So I see myself as African American, and during the riots and things that were going on, I saw this person with this red, black, and green. It's behind me, the red, black, and green American flag, right? And so I said, I got to have one of those flags. And the reason why I purchased it was because of my heritage, right? I am seen as, I consider myself to be an African American, right? And so I have not denounced the American flag at all. I mean, I understand what the American flag stands for. I understand that I'm an American citizen, but in pride for myself, it was my way of saying I'm still an American, but I want to show the African side of who I am as well. And people challenge that. People are like, well, you're not patriotic. It's like, wait a minute. Never, ever did it come out of my mouth that I wasn't being patriotic. It was saying I'm identifying who I am as a person. And this is the way I choose to do so. Do you all feel that in regards to how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think that that idea of knowing yourself enough to be able to represent something, to be able to represent yourself, and what you feel is a very powerful thing. Considering, I think that in America right now, there's a lot of people that don't have that self awareness, and so they follow somebody else. And I
Yeah,
think that's what we're seeing happen right now. Is that a lot of these people don't know who to follow. They don't have any sense of how am I connected to other people around me, or even how am I connected to this country? And unfortunately, some people take that being their only connection. Some people, that's their only connection they have, is to like a country. And you start to get that people that resonate with that as, I'm an American, which is cool. but
that's true.
but at the same time, I think sometimes it gets misconstrued in a whole different way, because they're hearing other people say it, and they're just following along. And I think it's a great thing, sir, to be able to, like, yeah, to be able to have that self-awareness to say, like, yes, I am still a citizen, but I'm a citizen unto myself, and this is what I believe, and these are my beliefs.
Right,
And that's the biggest thing right now, is that nobody wants to hear anybody anymore. Nobody wants to hear anybody out.
right.
Um, you know, how many times I had to write a paper? I had to write an editorial a couple of months ago for the paper, where they sent me out to go find Native American and minority Trump supporters, and basically sit down and have conversations with them. And it was mind blowing for me, because the rhetoric was definitely there. But these are people that these are people not too far from my own community. And man, some of those, like, so there's a gentleman who we were on complete opposite sides of the fence on everything. But in us having a sit down conversation, I mean, I could have sworn that the guy was like my long lost uncle or something like that, because I mean, we got along, you
Right.
know, and we had a sit down conversation, but at the same time, our politics were completely different.
It's really interesting, right? Because when you think about that, are you voting for your own interests, or are you voting for some type of utopia that you think is going to be, right? So that's the thing that I think a lot of people gravitate towards when they go one party or the other, and so that's pretty interesting. So Gary, when you see a movie like Dances with Wolves, and this depiction of people, and and how that whole thing kind of comes about, the, culturally, it kind of shared what maybe one particular tribe kind of gravitated towards, but it definitely doesn't talk about the traditions and the cultural values that are held by the multitude of tribes that are here. Because again, like you said, it kind of gives this one dimensional character view of what a Native American is. So those types of things kind of hurt or have a negative effect on the Native American community who are trying to kind of showcase who they are in their own personhood and their own humanity.
Well, yeah, thanks. I believe that that's been true for well over a century now, believe it or not. There were Native American leaders by 1911 and 12 who were decrying the depictions of Native Americans in films of that period. And if
Mhm.
you go back that far, they weren't even so much what we think of as cowboy and Indian movies, John Wayne or what have you. They were often films. I suppose the best remembered would be the Battle of Elderbush Gulch, which was made around 1913 by D.W. Griffith. They were more films that were considered Indian massacre films
Yeah,
rather than just two opposing sides, like John Wayne and so forth in Stagecoach. They were often films just about a group of settlers being beset by marauding, quote, Indians or savages. So, and Native Americans spoke out against that at the time, and the voices weren't generally heard.
Right.
I think there's a complicated history, as there are with anytime you're dealing with Hollywood, and I think ethnicity, particularly anything that's non-white, it's complicated because of so many reasons: the vast history, the thousands of films, the so many people involved. The first couple of Native American directors were Chickasaw, and one of them, Wallace Fox, I'm finishing a book about him right now. He made films that did depict the, quote, Indian we've just described, which is a very, kind of a problematic position, because he was working under contract. And do you do this or do you quit? Do you, so I guess what bothers me more, Kent, or what concerns me, is not so much a film from 50 or 100 years ago, because as a historian, I study them, but it's not anything I can actually do about, other than point out to maybe students the problems of the past. What really bothers me now, I would say, would be a film like Parasite.
Okay.
Bong Joon-ho is a great filmmaker. There's no doubt about it. He's one of the great filmmakers on the planet. A lot of us were first impressed with him in his earlier films like The Host. And yet you have a film like Parasite, where the little boy dresses up like a, quote, American Indian. It's all about his father and him playing, quote, savages. And then the party turns into literal, I don't know whether spoiler alert or whatever, but, the whole party where this is at the child's birthday party with this play on Native Americans becomes itself a murder battlefield. And it seems to be the result of this cultural appropriation of Native Americans. And this film wins Best Picture in 2020, right?
Yeah.
Literally, this year, the Best Picture had that kind of stereotype in it. So I guess, Kent, that's what bothers me the most, is not something, things from 100 years ago must bother us, of course,
Right.
but what bothers me most would be these recent problems of this type,
Right. So
Because
that kind of speaks to not being at the table, right? So
Yeah.
would it have been different if somebody had been at the table, right? That's why diversity is so important in regards to that. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, man, exactly. Speaking to that point exactly, is literally 4 hours ago, I was presenting to the Apple Final Cut Pro Worldwide Developers Conference. And so you have industry people that are the people that are making these films in there. And I kind of got a little bit in trouble earlier this week, because they had us go to a training session for our talks that we were about to give. And I tweeted out, I was like, you're breaking ground when you enter the room and you're the only person of color in this room. And I tweeted that, and the people with the organization got a little upset with me. And I was like, look, man. And I was like, I entered this room and it was 30 old white guys.
Yeah.
And I was the only person of color in this. There was not a female in the room. There was not another person of color in this room. And you're telling me that these are the people that are creating media at the highest levels?
Yeah.
And to see that was exactly what you said, is to have a place at that table where you are the creator. And those are the things that me and Jason talk about all the time.
Right. And listen to. There's got to be a meeting of the minds as to 30 white guys don't always get it right. You haven't lived our experience, so how can you know where to go with that? Jason, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah. I was just thinking I wrote this piece a couple of years ago for High Country News called it's like, why do white writers still make movies about Indians?
Uh-huh.
Basically, it speaks to this point of like the white savior trope and representation that we don't have. And so you see a lot of contemporary films, they use us for cultural, accents. I think of Hell or High Water, Taylor Sheridan, I can't remember, it was a couple of years ago. He used my tribe specifically, Comanches, as this kind of like, it was well done. Like, I usually put two hats on when I watch films. There's the cultural critic, and then there's the film critic. Like,
right.
So as a film, I thought it was pretty cool. But of course, the Comanche guy, and I can't remember the actor's name, great actor, who was actually Comanche. He dies, in service to the white protagonist character. And that happens over and over again. You see this, like, we're never the guy, we never save the day. We're
Not
always
the victor.
we're always Tonto. We're never Lone Ranger.
Right.
So it's it speaks to this idea of we need to make our own content and our own films where we persevere, where we're the protagonists, where we get to tell our stories.
Well, we got to come back. I mean, we're running. Listen, this hour has flown with regards to what we were talking about. I mean, there's so many things that I think that are germane to the Native American culture. I think about, I want to ask you all about the pipeline and what your thoughts are about that and how that has affected communities and all of that. And so there's so much more. There's such a rich array of information that we can kind of talk about. So I want to invite you guys back another time and just to continue the conversation because it's important. It's really important. Your perspectives are so refreshing to kind of hear that. And I think that we have to pay homage to Native Americans. We just have to because, if it not been for our forefathers who kind of been here on this land, this whole thing about evolving and us becoming this nation that we are, but we can't not recognize all of it. And so I appreciate you all. Gary, I appreciate you for reaching out to me and getting me to just know a little bit more about you and what you do here at UCF, and also with the work that you're doing, the editorials and what you're doing in Hollywood. I wish you all, just Godspeed with regards to all the work that you're doing. And so it's exciting. Jonathan, I just now want to know what happened in that boardroom. I mean, there's so much that you guys have brought forward. And Jason, what kind of coffee do you drink when you go down to this coffee shop? All of this is now in my brain. And so
Cortado.
Say it again?
I drink cortados.
Okay, all right. There you go. But I want to just thank you. Like I said, we're coming on the end of the hour. Is there any last minute things that you want to share or say before we cut out for today?
It was great to be here.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having us, Ken. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to have you all back. So thank you. You all, once, for me, once I make a friend, and I'm calling you all my friends. So once I make a friend, I'm going to call back. So, I appreciate you all again. And so with that, I want to thank our sponsor, which is the UCF Foundation Office, who are in part helping to kind of bring this thing together. Look out for us. We are on Spotify, guys. We are definitely going to be on YouTube to be able to showcase this, but we have the audio on Spotify and Anchor.fm. If you all want to kind of share this message with others that are out there, but I really truly appreciate you all. And so on this Friday, our next show coming up is going to be on Universal Children's Day. And we got a bunch of little kids who are going to be talking with me about just what life is like for them as kids, especially during this pandemic. And so with that, thank you all. And we're just going to bow out. So have a really, really great rest of the day. And we'll talk soon. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.